to get an idea of how many of you actually, is this your first half iron distance, or have you done it before? So I'm just going to launch a little poll, and you can just respond yes or no. I think it will be quite interesting to see how many of you have actually done a half iron distance race before. Maybe for some there's quite a few. Okay, so I'll actually tell you what the poll vote is. Okay, I'm going to close that poll. Okay, so 75% of the audience that's listening here, actually it's their first time that they're doing a half iron distance. So I think this is actually quite important to understand because eating is very critical, definitely in the week leading up to the event. So let's get to it. It's a very critical week, as I mentioned, and training time is over. You're in a complete taper period. So you reduce the volume of training. What's very critical this week is to sharpen the muscles and also to maximize rest and recovery. The only thing you can really focus on this week is not just about sharpening your system, and maybe Donovan will talk about that a little bit later, but is also you need to focus on nutrition and you need to actually start eating correctly. What to avoid, what not to eat in the week leading up to 70.3 is very critical. Things like refined carbohydrates, processed foods such as instant microwave meals, etc., takeouts. Deep fried foods I would avoid completely. Very heavy laden foods with sugar, meaning sweets, chocolates, cereals, tinned fruits, honey, everything that's very high in sugar I definitely would try and avoid. Heavy milk products and bad fats I would also try and avoid. I don't say this because fats are bad. I'm talking about the fact that there is a large percentage of people that I do deal with that are lactose intolerant, but yet they still absolutely love dairy. If something negatively impacts your system, as much as you love it and as much as you like it, rather avoid it because it will have some sort of a negative impact on you. And just to give you an example, dairy can cause excessive mucus. It has got a lactose effect. It can cause digestive discomfort. So if you are impacted by it, even though you love your chocolate milk or whatever you love, rather try and avoid it. Foods that are very high in fiber can also cause bowel discomfort and digestive issues. So there needs to be a certain amount of fiber in your diet, but don't overdo it. Don't eat excessive fibrous foods. And then excessive stimulants like numerous cups of coffee and tea, etc., are definitely something that I would actually avoid. Something that I'd like to say about stimulants is that in the week leading up to an event like this, on an emotional level, there are nerves, and taking in stimulants can actually cause additional stress, which is something that's not wanted. There's something I'll talk about a little bit later on, which is actually the benefits of caffeine, but that generally works for people that are more caffeine intolerant. So what should you focus on in the week up to 70.3? And I think this is quite important. So focus on eating things like complex carbohydrates, quinoa, amaranth, oats, sweet potatoes. They definitely, from a carbohydrate point of view, are a lot better. By the way, if you cook potatoes, just as an example, don't bake them, rather boil or steam them, because baking a potato actually increases the glycemic index. It's like a sugar bomb. You might as well stick a glucose drip in your arm. Creates a very high sugar concentrate. So steaming and boiling is always far better. Healthy fats such as flax seeds, coconut oil, avocado, sesame, nuts and seeds such as almonds, cashews, walnuts. And that doesn't mean go and eat a whole bag of nuts, because nuts are very, very, very high in calories due to the fat content and protein content. So I know a lot of people that can sit and eat nuts all day long. I limit my almond intake to maybe 7 to 10 almonds a day. Just to give you an idea, yes, a very, very small amount is all that's needed. Fruits and vegetables, obviously the higher percentage in vegetables, because fruits obviously have a percentage of sugar in them, and preferably vegetables that are fruits that are low GI, so something that doesn't spike your blood sugar. Probably go for things like apples, mango, peaches, etc. And look at a high vegetable content, things like spinach, broccoli, rocket chives, cauliflower. Anything that's green is pretty good, and it also obviously helps with liver function, which is very important. I mentioned dairy before. Are you 100% sure you don't have any reactions to dairy? I know some people aren't lactose intolerant, but yet they still suffer from rhinitis or some sort of nasal congestion. On the day of the event, the last thing you want is any breathing problems. You don't want a blocked nose. You don't want any mucus, unnecessary mucus, especially you have to go through a swim. Breathing is the most critical thing. What about hydration? And this is a very, I would say this is very critical in the week leading up to the event. A lot of people sometimes focus on their food, but they forget about the fluid intake. You need to arrive at your event 100% hydrated, because, and that doesn't mean fluid sitting in your stomach. The muscles need to take up the fluid, and it's very important to understand that you need to arrive at the event 100% hydrated. In other words, the right amount of fluid that's sitting in the muscles, because that you are going to basically get rid of through the event. And if you arrive at the event only 50 or 60% hydrated, you are going to land yourself up in trouble. There's no way you'll be able to take in that amount of fluid to replace what's lost as far as the fluid that sits in the muscle. So be very careful on that. I do recommend taking around 14 milliliters of fluid per kilogram of body weight, and that is not in the form of coffee or tea, because caffeine is a diuretic, so you do not absorb all the fluid that you want. You get rid of it. I'm talking about water as a fluid, and I always recommend to people, for every 2 cups of coffee, for every cup of coffee you have, add an additional 2 cups of water. To give you an idea how much 40 mils per kilogram of body weight is, if you weigh 60 kilograms, you're looking at about 2.4 liters of water a day. So if you're close to 70, you're looking closer to 3 liters of water a day. And if you're taking a few herbal teas like rooibos and that along with the water intake, it's pretty okay. But try and reduce your caffeine intake and don't make it excessive. 1 cup a day, I think, is more than sufficient. And rather have it early on in the morning so that you can focus on hydrating yourself up into the evening. In 2 days leading up to the event, you basically are, you really need to worry about certain things. And I hear a lot of people talking about they like to drink beer or have a glass of wine, etc. Just understand one thing, that any alcohol that you consume, and I'm telling you it's up to 72 hours prior to the event, will impact you in a negative way. So I would avoid it completely. Rather focus on having it after the event. Let that be your treat if you really can't deal with it. And by the way, alcohol actually also impedes muscle recovery, so I always laugh at people that drink beers at the finish line, but if you really must, then go ahead and do it. There is reason to celebrate when you get across that line. So from a nutrition point of view, just that is something that you should avoid. Ensure that you are eating and hydrating constantly. You're not skipping meals. Avoid heavy red meats. And this is something that many athletes make mistakes with. To eat meat can take up to 48 hours to digest. And I can promise you now, it doesn't make a difference. If you eat a piece of meat the day before, maybe a day and a half before the event, that piece of meat, if it's red meat, is going to be sitting in your system. And you can feel a kind of discomfort, especially if you're pushing yourself at a high intensity. I've made the mistake many years ago where I actually, the day before I had maybe a filet steak or something like that, and the next day I raced, and unfortunately it caused a whole lot of digestive havoc, especially at a high intensity. So it's something you should try and focus on easily digestible proteins, things like fish and chicken and eggs and ostrich, things are a little bit easier on the digestive system, and not look at very heavy proteins to take in. The day before the event, you definitely want to be very careful of what you eat. So stick to a plan and definitely don't look at creating any digestive issues. If you do have a high carbohydrate diet, some people have low carb diets, some people have high carb diets, then make your lunchtime meal the day before your carb meal. Do not plan on eating excessive carbohydrates the night before the event. And the reason being is that a lot of people focus on overeating carbohydrates, and the problem is that because they're all worried about carb loading, and I'll discuss that a little bit later on, but the problem is that they'll end up feeling really overfull the night before. They cannot sleep because they're feeling a lot of discomfort, and to be quite honest, it's not actually doing you any service whatsoever. Just a little bit on carb loading, and I'll actually point you guys at the end. I've written an article around carb loading. In the week leading up to an event, you're tapering your training. In other words, you're not putting in that volume of training, so you're not really depleting your glycogen stores. Your workouts are a lot shorter and smaller. You're not really burning off glycogen. But if you carry on eating consistently and normally, you will naturally top up those glycogen stores. So by actually adding an excessive amount of carbohydrates into your diet, you will probably land up at the event overweight. And believe me, if you land up at an event a kilogram or kilogram and a half overweight, and you haven't trained at that particular weight, it will impact you on the day, and you will suffer for it. There's no necessity to overeat. You will naturally top up your carbohydrate stores. You can increase your carbohydrate intake slightly, but definitely don't make it excessive. The night before the event, and I'll talk about that now, you should be eating something that's pretty small and focus on sleep, and then the next morning focus on a proper pre-race meal, and that is the most critical for the day. So just an example of something like the night before, and I'll put that at the bottom there. Eat something simple like a vegetable omelette on low GI bread, or scrambled eggs on toast with a side salad, or chicken or fish dinner with salad or veggies is perfect. You can add a few tablespoons of rice or quinoa once it's cooked, but really, I mean, you don't need to actually eat more than that. You really need to focus on sleep. And for a first timer, it's very, very difficult to sleep properly the night before the event. I know there's pre-race nerves. We all know what it feels like. Even elite athletes go through the bouts of pre-race nerves. Whether you're trying to get to the finish line or if you're worried about performing, we all feel the same thing. But by putting stress on your digestive system, you aren't going to help yourself sleep much at night. On race day morning, it is very, very critical in terms of nutrition. And I hear so many people telling me they can't eat so early in the morning. It doesn't matter if you can't eat so early in the morning. You need to force yourself to eat something. And you actually should have been doing this in training as well, because you need to obviously stick to what you've done during training, but don't go out and think that you can do a half Ironman on an empty stomach. It ain't going to happen. You need to consume something. It's very difficult to eat a large meal at that time of the morning, I do agree, but you can have something more in the form of porridge or fluid or something that's got some calories in. And I would say you need to aim for something that's plus minus 300 calories. Do not spike your blood sugar levels in the morning. In other words, don't eat things that are overly high in sugar. Rather stick to something that is sort of on a carbohydrate is a stability carb, a carbohydrate that will provide you some stability. So if you're looking at a porridge or a cereal, I would say something like a rolled oats or a Future Life, but add some protein and fat to that. Throw some coconut milk in or some coconut oil. Add some nut butter, for example, sugar-free peanut butter. There's nothing wrong with that, and it will give you some nice sustainable energy, which will be available later on. Other kinds of meals that some of my athletes actually eat are things like bread, such as raw oats or a seed loaf, and then they put some peanut butter on, or some honey, or some bananas. Some of my athletes love Nutella on low GI bread. It is a bit of a sugar spike, but they add a little bit of protein and a bit of fat to their meal to try and reduce that spike. Personally, when it comes to triathlon, I can't really eat rolled oats before the event. I find that it's just I battle in the swim. It bloats me a little bit. So I also tend to stick to things like a low GI bread or a rye bread, and I actually throw nut butter and I throw half a banana sliced on top of it, and that's actually suitable for me as a pre-race meal. Some people like eggs or meat, etc., but I wouldn't eat too heavy on the meat side. I'd try and stick to sort of the easier consumed and carbs. One thing that you should do as well is when you head off to the race, because you might only eat your meal at about 4 o'clock in the morning. I think one of the things that you need to focus on when you head off to the race is to just take a little snack with you. You are going to be in transition zone. If at 4 in the morning you're already starting to get ready and you're not eating anything from 4 to 6 a.m., just as an example, or even a bit later up until the race starts, you are burning off calories, and you obviously are losing a little bit of fluid. So just make sure you keep your hydration levels a little bit topped up. Definitely do not overdrink, because bladder overload is the worst, especially because you're going into a swim. And when you're swimming, your body's a lot cooler. You're generally not sweating as much as you are when the temperatures climb later on. You'll sweat a lot more and you'll get rid of a lot more fluid, but during the swim it's very difficult. You don't want to have an overloaded bladder, and you definitely don't want to overeat, because that will lead to digestive discomfort. And the reason for that is that when you're swimming, you are in a form of buoyancy and things float around, and it's very, very difficult to manage. So make sure that you don't overdo it. What I like to do generally is I actually take a sort of a carbohydrate protein shake, and I generally sip on it a little bit in transition while I'm getting ready, or I eat a little bit of a food bar or something like that, and I only take little sips of water, but I definitely don't overdo it, because for most people, I mean, they might have maximum up to probably an hour of a swim. Hopefully for most of you it will be less, and then the bike will become your kitchen. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of organizations, and we don't knock any other companies by any means, but there are a lot of people that say you should pop a gel before or at the start of the event. And personally, in a half iron distance, I think that is the worst mistake that an athlete can make. Unless you are going out like a rocket, there's no need to take a gel at the start line, because you are immediately spiking your blood sugar levels. The intensity that you are going at when you are swimming is probably a very controlled pace. You're definitely not performing at a massively high intensity, and just by taking a gel, you're spiking your blood sugar levels, and you also need to take in a certain amount of fluid with a gel in order to make sure that the solution is actually diluted a little bit, so it doesn't cause any GI distress. In actual fact, when you consume a gel, you need to take in around 250 to 280 mils of water. So to take one at the start of the swim, it's not worth it. If you are going to take a gel, you want to try and keep it towards the end of the event when you maybe really, really need it. And I would say that would be on the run. Unless you're an athlete that's going at a very, very high race pace and you actually are flattening that insulin spike, this isn't a full flat-out event. And it's something that I just want to make you wary of. So don't go and pop a gel at the start. Half iron distance race for 90% of the field is more of a controlled effort. It's really the elites. They also go at a controlled effort, and they do pace themselves, and we'll chat to Donovan about that shortly, but I think that is something that is quite a common mistake, and it's an overfeed when it's not necessary. How should you fuel during the race? So endurance fueling is first of all one of the aspects that many athletes get wrong, and I'll tell you why. There's many athletes that overhydrate, there's many athletes that overeat, there's many athletes that underhydrate or undereat, and there's a very big difference in doing a half iron distance like for a pro athlete in 4.5 hours, and then for as opposed to fueling for say a 2-hour race. And for most people in the field, I mean, it's going to be between a 4 and a 7-hour race. It's a fact that your glycogen stores can probably see you naturally for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. You can probably conserve 30% of that by consuming the correct carbohydrates, but generally through the race you are going to start to have to use fat as a form of fuel, and spiking your insulin levels is going to mitigate that significantly. Usually the guys that are doing plus minus 4 hours are racing at a much higher intensity. Feeding is usually a little harder to control due to the pace, so each feed needs to be a quality feed. And generally for the guys that are going at a very high intensity, they might not be able to eat very comfortably, and they might rely more on fluid intake because it's a lot more easier to consume. The problem that when you rely on fluid intake is that often the bottle contains fluid, plus it actually contains your energy, and that can be very dependent on weather conditions as to how much you're consuming in an hour. So I'm just trying to explain to you that if you've got a bottle that contains 750 mils of water, and inside of that bottle you've got probably, let's say, 100 grams of carbs, or maybe, well, it would be very unlikely 100 grams of carbs, but maybe 50 to 75 grams of carbohydrate, and it's a cold day, you're going to be sweating a little bit less, so you won't be drinking as much. You probably will only take in half of the fluid in that bottle, and if your calories are sitting in that bottle, it means you're going to be taking in half of the amount of calories you require. So if you are going to depend on a fluid feed, make sure that you keep your energy and hydration requirements completely separate. You don't want them to be the same. And separating hydration and energy requirements is always the best idea. If you have calories in a bottle to consume, remember, if the temperature is cold, you'll consume less, which means less calories. If it's warm conditions, then you will probably be fine. But it's worth checking and testing this, and especially what you're comfortable with. Just an idea that I've put there. I actually, for some of my athletes that prefer fluid feed, what I did was I put in a concentrated solution of carbohydrates, and we worked out based on the amount of fluid and the amount of carbohydrate content that was actually in the bottle. They would actually, we would mark it off in the bottle, and they would consume per an hour, in hour 1, hour 2, hour 3, and the other bottle would be plain water. So they made sure that they got in sufficient calories through the one bottle, and they would use the other bottle just to be able to hydrate with. And that's why I say it's always very critical that you keep those two separate. One of the big mysteries, and this is something that everybody talks about, the 60 to 90 gram of carbohydrates per hour, that the human body is capable of absorbing only 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour. But if you combine the right combination of, if you put together the right combination of carbohydrates, they call it multi-transporter, various carbohydrates, especially the glucose to fructose 2-to-1, your body is capable of absorbing 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. But I need to stress this. The amount of carbohydrates that you consume or that you try and consume is not based on the consumption itself. It's all very well and fine throwing 60, 70, 80 or 90 grams of carbohydrates into your mouth. The biggest problem though is how much your body is capable of absorbing. And if your body is not capable of absorbing and utilizing that amount of carbohydrate, you are going to suffer, most likely from GI distress. Some of our athletes, they're professional athletes, and one of them specifically is Liz Blatchford. She came third at Kona Ironman, and I can tell you now that Liz's intake was anywhere between 37 grams to probably around 50 grams of carbs per hour at the most, and that was absolutely perfect for an iron distance race. So it's very, very important that you understand. You don't want to underdo it, but you don't want to overdo it either. And overconsumption of carbohydrates is going to leave you feeling really terrible. Remember, each person's unique. What works for one person definitely does not work for another, and I think that's very critical to understand. You know, we've got a variety of products at 32GI. Our accelerate drink, for example, is a multi-transporter carbohydrate. There's 75 grams of carbs in there, and you've got the ability to maximize that amount. But not everybody can drink 70 or take in 75 grams of carbs in an hour and a half. It's a very difficult thing, and it's something that you really need to play with. So what about, never mind the 4 to 6 hour athletes, what about the 6 to 8 hour 70.3 athletes? And I think there's a lot of people out there that might be looking at those kinds of times. In other words, a slightly slower race. And in the case of a triathlete that is going a lot longer in the day, it's not an all-out race against the clock. And this requires a completely different feeding strategy. And the key principles here are to feed more frequently and early on. In other words, when you're on the bike, that is your kitchen, and you should be feeding more frequently. And you should try and feed early on, small amounts at a time. And the reason for this is that, first of all, your energy levels will be far more balanced. And second of all, there will be less stress on the digestive system because it's small amounts at a time, and the digestive system won't be shocked. For people that only eat every hour, it's a bit of a shock. If you don't eat for an hour, then you suddenly eat for an hour. So the system's getting no nutrients or no food for an hour, and then suddenly it's all of a sudden getting food in the next hour. So I would like to try and recommend that your feed should be around 20 to 30 minutes apart. Try and keep it more frequent, and I can promise you now, if you keep that frequency on the bike, by the time you get onto the run, it's very possible that you might not feel like eating very much, but you will have enough energy in your system that will keep you very stable for quite a bit of time, and you might be able to take in some sugar or some carbohydrates that are on course for the rest of the day, but a very small amount which will keep you going to the finish line, and you'll feel a lot better. If you do not feed yourself properly on the bike, I can bet you right now that when you get onto that run, you will hit a flat spot, and you don't want to get there. You eat for the run. You're eating for the run to get to the bike and for the run, and you need to keep building yourself as much as possible. Just some race day nutrition examples. Pre-race we've discussed before, and on the actual hydration, we offer hydration products, so you can use Endure Accelerators hydration depending on requirements. And just an example, and this is based on what some of our athletes do. They'll take, for example, 32GI chews. They might eat a block every 20 to 30 minutes. A food bar they sometimes split into 3 to 4 pieces over a 90-minute period, and some people take tablets. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, don't mix it up too much. Keep the feeds frequent. You can mix up flavors, you can mix up different products, but make sure they're small amounts over a longer period of time, and your body will be far better for it. There's a big debate on fat fueling versus carb fueling, and what I explain to people is that intensity really determines fuel usage. And the reason for this is that our body gets energy from muscle glycogen, fat, and if necessary, protein. But you definitely don't want to break down protein. It means you're in quite a sorry state in actual fact. Glycogen stores are basically limited. You can only have a certain amount of calories worth. So I would say probably 90 minutes to 2 hours maximum. And but your fat stores are completely unlimited. It's a fact that when you're performing at a very high intensity, in other words, if you are puffing and panting and you cannot even talk, in other words, you're not getting enough oxygen into your system, there is no ways you have the ability to burn fat as a source of fuel. Fat requires oxygen to break down and be utilized as a source of fuel. If you're not getting oxygen into your system, then you're definitely not at that state, and that's generally somebody performing at an extremely high intensity. However, if you are basically doing exercise and you have got the ability to talk and you're feeling quite comfortable with your breathing, it means that you've got the ability to utilize your fat stores, and in that case you would look at some kind of feeding that doesn't spike your blood sugar levels to take advantage of that, because you actually become more fat efficient. And remember, a gram of fat is actually 9 calories as opposed to a gram of carbohydrates, which is 4 calories. So you get a lot of power from that, but the problem is that most athletes I know, they actually mitigate using their fat stores. And if you ask me, Ironman and half Ironman are actually very good events because of the controlled pace. They're very good events to be able to utilize your fat stores if you've got the ability to do that. But the minute you spike your insulin levels, you mitigate that completely. And that's why I say taking a gel at the onset of a race has already put you into that sort of a position. So I'm going to, Donovan, I'm going to actually unmute you now. If you give me a sec. And if there are any questions as well, please just let me know. I will definitely answer them. Just let me see if Donovan's there. Can you hear me, Donovan? Hello?
Yep, I'm back.
Okay. So
can you hear me?
Yes, I definitely can. So Donovan, I mean, I mentioned earlier on around the week leading up to an event, and basically sort of you're an athlete that races more around the 4-hour mark. So it's obviously a lot higher intensity. But so just maybe you can give us an idea of like how you prep from a nutrition point of view, and maybe even bring some training into it, how you also taper in the week leading up to an event, because I think that's quite critical. Some people overdo it on the training, and are still doing like quite major sessions up until even the Wednesday or the Thursday before. So I mean, it's nice to hear from an elite athlete, you know, how they would prepare leading up to an event.
Cool. Well, I think the first thing that we have to mention is that the intensity between there's no real difference between intensity between the guy who's winning the race and the guy who's taking 8 hours. The difference is that the guy who's winning the race has trained his body so that the speed he generates at that intensity allows him to do 4 hours as opposed to 8. So I think a half Ironman distance race is an aerobic activity. So you're always racing below your threshold. You should always feel like you could go harder if you needed to. But so that ties in exactly with what you were saying about nutrition. I mean, you never want to be gasping for air. You know, I think the only acceptable point of it might be in the swim if you want to just swim yourself into some space. But if you can help it in a race like this, you want to be calm and collected and be able to actually talk in short sentences the whole way, which then obviously allows you to utilize more fat stores, and yeah, you can avoid the really high spiking type of nutrition. As far as training goes, yeah, this week, yeah, there's a lot of different approaches that I've seen. I follow people on Twitter and Facebook, and yeah, some people have started tapering quite a while ago, which I don't agree with. And then others, like you say, are training too hard this week. The key to the week of the race is to keep training, because as again, what you said earlier, if you stop training altogether, you're going to put on weight. Your body also then, the muscles shorten and tighten, and so you want to keep the engine idling. And you know, the sessions are a lot shorter because the hard work has been done. You're not going to improve in this week, but you want to be able to do a couple of race pace efforts, but obviously much shorter. So you're just teaching your body what the race pace is going to feel like, and just keeping the body aware of what it's got to do, and burning off the excess calories so that you don't, you know, gain weight. And you know, like you said, that power to weight ratio is the critical number for all competitors, and you don't want to bump up the weight side of things.
Okay, and then from a nutrition point of view, what do you generally focus on as far as like those 2 to 3 days, critical days before the event? Are you a fan of carb loading, or do you prefer just watching that carb intake and not being excessive about it?
Yeah, I obviously started racing in the middle of the 80s, where carb loading was the big thing. I think the guys used to do a diet called the Sultan diet, if I remember correctly, which was basically they depleted their carbs, and then it was a crazy story. But yeah, it's taken a while for folks of my age to throw that out the window, but I definitely don't do that anymore. I try and keep my eating as normal as possible. I don't do anything that I don't normally do. I don't eat any weird things that I'm not used to eating. If I eat weird things normally, then I'll still eat them. But I think the most critical thing is hydration, as you pointed out, especially if you're traveling to a race and if it involves a long road trip, like for East London, a lot of people drive down. Sitting in a car, it's a natural environment, something you're not used to. You've got to have that bottle with you. And apart from that, it's a good thing. It'll make you want to go to the toilet every now and again. So you got to stop every 2 hours just to stretch the legs and water a tree.
You actually mentioned a very important point there, is that a lot of people are actually traveling down to East London. I think it's very important to understand that when you go to a foreign city, you sometimes got to be careful of the food availability, where you're staying and what you would eat. And a lot of people end up eating in restaurants, etc. You've got to understand this is a very small town, and suddenly there's thousands of athletes and people that are in this little tiny town, probably overloading the restaurants, especially the pasta restaurants. And you shouldn't trust a restaurant to change the water on the pasta, and you should be very careful of what you consume, because you might eat something, let's say on the Friday night, even if the race is on the Sunday, it could be a pasta meal. It might have a bit of bad bacteria in there, and you might end up actually with a stomach bug. And after all that effort and that big expense in gearing up for a big event, you could ruin it through one meal. So I generally recommend to people, take some food with you. Try and get a self-catering unit if you can, but just make sure that what you do eat is not going to impact you negatively for race day. I think that's quite critical, and I think some of us I've definitely suffered from that before when I've traveled abroad and raced. It's been very difficult, especially staying in a hotel. And you go down to dinner or breakfast, and the food selection is just not suitable for your system. So you need to be quite wary of that. I think, Donovan, you've also had your fair share.
Yeah, 100%. I had my first one, when was that, 1991. I think my first ever trip to a World Championships was in Palm Springs in the States. And at that stage, I was actually a vegetarian. I didn't eat red meat, and the only thing I could get the night before the race was seafood pasta. Now, Palm Springs was, I don't know, I think about 4 hours from the coast. And yeah, so the seafood wasn't 100%, and I actually didn't finish. I ended up on a drip. And then, 2 years ago, Brazil, they had flooding, and it's the same story. The water overflowed the sewage system, and the restaurant where we were eating, obviously rinsing the lettuces and things like that with the water. So it actually wasn't even the food. It was the water that they were rinsing the veggies with. And same thing, ended up on a drip there as well in Brazil, which was a lot less fun than Palm Springs.
Donovan, another question I wanted to ask you is that what do you generally do the night before a race and the morning of a race as far as meals go? Because those are very critical. I mentioned earlier to try and keep the meal manageable and small so you get a good night's sleep. And the morning of the race, I mean, obviously I've stressed the criticality of a pre-race meal. What do you generally do when it comes to a 70.3 race, or any race for that matter?
I think again the key is to keep it simple, and try to do what you would normally do. Like you said, self-catering is always the way to go as far as I'm concerned. You can make your own supper, the way you always do it. The timing is also very critical, I think, with that evening meal, especially if it's a really early start to the race. If you have that too late, then your toilet appointments the next day are going to be a little bit out of sync, and obviously you want to get that all done before you start the race. So yeah, you've got to give the food time to work their way through your system. I don't know how to put this delicately.
I think every athlete knows about cleaning their digestive system first thing in the morning. It is a very critical part of race preparation.
Yeah, and it's purely a case of the timing of that evening meal. And also the earlier you can eat, the earlier you can try to get to bed. But yeah, like you say, if it's an important race, and I think it's still the same for everyone. Obviously, after nearly 30 years of it, you get a little bit blasé about racing, but the big races you still get a bit hyped and excited, and we've all got our own expectations, and it's very hard to switch the mind off when you go to bed. So the key to sleep for me has always been 2 nights before. Where you can switch the brain off, get a good night's sleep, almost bank the sleep, and then whatever happens on the night before the race happens. As far as the morning meal goes, I'm not a great eater in the early morning. I do battle, but for, like you say, for a half Ironman distance, there's no 2 ways about it. You have to have something to eat, and my personal preference, just because it's really all I can face at that time of the day, is toast with banana or something like that, just to kind of fill that little gap in my stomach and kind of stabilize things.
Okay, and I think that's it's quite a critical point actually around the digestive system, and I think it's quite important as well what you mentioned about sleep. So I'd just like to touch on that a bit more. The Friday nights before the Sunday, and Donovan mentioned it now, it is so critical that night you get an early night and you really try and get as much sleep as you possibly can, because the following night it is a lot more difficult to sleep. A lot of people go out to these pasta parties to all hours, and it's just not, if you really want to have a good race on the Sunday, you rather want to try and bank that sleep that Friday night, which is how you put it. And as far as the morning goes, just to get the digestive system working, a very good way of doing that is to actually really to start off by having something warm to drink, either a rooibos tea or a green tea or something hot to try and stimulate the digestive system. It is quite important. The last thing you want to, I mean, pre-race nerves touch everybody, and it does affect the digestive system negatively. So, it's just something that you should wake up to and try to calm the system down a little bit and get it working properly. We have got a number of questions, and there's still a few things that I want to touch on, but I'm going to throw another poll at you guys in the meantime, and I just want to actually see what your opinion is around nutrition. I mean, have you considered nutrition to be important or not? So if you guys could just possibly answer, it would be great. And then I'll carry on. Sure. So 100% of you feel that nutrition is important. I'm impressed. Some of the pro athletes don't feel it's important. But I'll close that poll. I've got 2 other polls that I'm going to pull up as well. So I think that's a very critical thing. This is not nutrition related, but one of the things that I generally do when I'm actually walking to transition zone is that when I'm preparing, there's different ways that you can actually calm yourself. With me, I actually like to plug music in my ears and drown out every single person around me. I don't like to hear the talking. I don't like to hear about the wind. I don't like to hear about the weather. I like to just be in my own zone where I'm calm and I'm actually focused on my own race and I've got my own plan, and that's the way I do it. Some people like to talk to other people or crack jokes, whatever it is, but there are many mechanisms to try and make yourself feel calm before the race. And remember, every single person that you're actually with is in exactly the same situation as you. If somebody suddenly starts to throw things at you around nutrition and have you done this and have you done that, just shut out everything. You know what you've done, you know what you've prepared, and stick to what you've prepared on race day. Don't do anything different on race day from a nutrition point of view that you have prepared for. If you have trained with a specific nutrition and you're eating in a specific way, definitely do not make any changes on the day. Don't suddenly try something new, because it's definitely going to impact you negatively. And I mean, we see that happening a lot. I mean, Donovan, would you agree with that? Just generally stick to what you've been training with.
No, definitely. I mean, the key to before the race, during the race, everything is to just go with what you know. You know, if you've been making mistakes up to this point, it's not the time to correct them. You know, rather do something wrong that you're used to than do something right that you're not used to. Your results will be better.
I've got a question here from somebody. Janesh says he's trained to take a solid meal, which is a half a food bowl every 45 minutes on the bike, coming straight off the swim. Should I still keep it that way or take one a bit earlier on the bike? So I'll ask Donovan now, but you know, my suggestion is to actually start the feed on the bike as soon as you actually are in a comfort zone. The first few kilometers on the bike, or maybe the first 2 or 3 kilometers on the bike, you've just come out of the swim. You know, your body's trying to get into sort of a stable position. You've been lying down for quite a while. All of a sudden, you're standing up. It's a very difficult thing to start eating right away. I only start feeding on the bike once I'm in a comfort zone. In other words, my aerobic engine is kicked in and I'm feeling comfortable. That's when I start the feed. The one thing you can do when you come out the water, though, is maybe to rinse out your mouth. It is a sea swim. Sometimes you swallow a little bit too much salt, etc. So taking a little bit of water or fluid is not a bad idea. Don't overdo it, but definitely try and rinse yourself and take a little bit of fluid in as early as you can. But the food only start to take in once you're in a comfort zone. Donovan, I mean, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I agree 100%. You know, coming out the water, like you say, because you've been in a prone position, and as soon as you stand up, you actually go through a blood pressure change. Your blood pressure lowers when you're lying down like that because obviously the heart's not working against gravity. So, yeah, your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate shoots up as now you're suddenly using the big muscles in your legs to run out the transition. So, yeah, you got to get through that. You got to get your shoes on. You got to get on the bike, ride the first few Ks. I mean, just from a riding strategy, the first few Ks of the cycle should be finding your rhythm. You know, not trying to push too hard. Just turning the legs until you get comfortable, until your shoulders ease from the swim and you can get into your aero position. And once you're in that comfortable position, then you can start thinking about eating. But before that, you can definitely drink, and you should drink. And like you said as well, the salt water, I mean, hopefully the conditions are going to be good on Sunday, but it can be a bit choppy down there. If you found you swallowed a lot of salt water, it's not a pleasant thing to do, but it actually has been suggested to me to stick your finger down your throat and actually throw up the salt water if there's salt water sitting in your stomach. Obviously, if it's excessive, not just a little bit of in your mouth every time you breathe, but to get rid of that salt water because that can cause havoc later on.
Yeah, so Janesh, I think the answer is there. Just wait till you're in a comfort zone before you start the feed, but just obviously monitor your fluid intake, and if you have swallowed a lot of salt water, don't overdo on the on the water side. You want to try and actually get rid of that water. And overhydration is actually quite a big issue as well when it comes to some events. I actually touched on that a little bit. There's another question that came up saying that I find that my nutrition requirements are quite different on race day than in training. In training, I keep a higher intensity for a short period of time, or do longer efforts at below race pace. So, what I generally stress, and you know, Donovan actually is my triathlon coach, interestingly enough. But you know, there's a period of time in training where you do high intensity and shorter sessions. And in those periods, I never used to really worry so much about my nutrition, especially if it was up to 2 hours, etc. I wasn't so worried. But there are times when I would do a longer training session, which could have been a 3 or 3.5 hour ride into a brick run. And that's where I say to most athletes, you should do nutrition training. In other words, when you're doing those brick sessions, that's a perfect time for you to try and simulate what you're going to be doing under racing conditions, because you're really going from a bike into a little run. So even if it's once every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever it is, you should try and wake up in the morning, eat something like you would on race day, fuel yourself on the bike as if you would, get off the bike and just run without any nutrition and see how you feel on the run. If you feel that run strong, like very strong towards the end of that run, if you're feeling strong by the end of that run, it means that your nutrition is actually pretty good. Pretty down packed. There hasn't been a drop in energy levels. You've come off the bike, your energy levels have been stable. Obviously, we can't do anything about the legs. They will be a little bit tired, but that kind of nutrition training is what you should try and emulate on race day. And there are times during training where you can do that. Obviously not all the time, but once a week or once every 2 or 3 weeks, at least if you're doing it, you'll get into a rhythm of how you can feed yourself on the day. And I think that's quite important. Donovan, I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I again agree. There should have been a period, maybe 3 or 4 weeks out, where you would do race simulation type of sessions. Obviously, you're not going to go out and do 90 Ks and run 21 off them. But one of my favorite sessions is a long cycle close to race distance at a fairly brisk tempo. Get off, run a short run, and then later in that same day, so 3 or 4 hours later, do another run. And exactly what you said there, you feel yourself on the bike, not for the bike, but for the short run afterwards and the run later in the day. And that will give you a good indication of how that's feeling, how full your tank is in the second run of the day.
Okay, so I mean the key is you've got to train your gut during training, not just your legs. I think that's very critical. It's important that you try and simulate your race nutrition during training in order to plan your nutrition strategy for the actual race day and try and stick to it. And if it doesn't work for some reason, if you come off the bike and you run and you have a terrible run, you're not feeling strong, you need to go back to the drawing board, change the nutrition, and then try it again until you actually get it right. I've got another question here. There's somebody that writes here, such a pity there's only one nutrition brand per aid station. Unfortunately, that's because there's only one nutrition sponsor per an event. I'll be using GU on the run because I don't want to carry all my 32Gi with me on the run. On the bike, it's fine to carry my 32Gi. So I think in this case, look, the bike is actually the most important part of your feed, because the majority of the time of the race is actually going to be spent on the bike. So all your nutrition, pre-race, pre-swim, and then on the bike is actually going to set the tone for the run. If you get that right, okay, on the run you might need very little nutrition. I personally, when I've done half iron distance, if I feed myself well on the bike, I can easily go around 90 minutes on the run and I can take in absolutely nothing, maybe just a little bit of water, and generally maybe I'll take in a little sip of Coke or some sugar or something like that, maybe in the last 3 or 4 kilometers, just to give me a bit of a kick to the finish or to wake my brain up a little bit. But if I fed myself well on the bike, I require very, very little nutrition on the run, to be quite honest. And I think that because it depends on obviously the distance and the time that you're going to be on doing on the run. But the elite athlete is running at a very high intensity. It could be 75-minute run. He's still going to need to be able to make sure that at high intensity he's fueled himself sufficiently to set up that run pace, and that you haven't got the time on the run really when they're running at that pace to fuel too often. So it's generally little sips of water here or there, or maybe a real little touch of sugar here or there. But the most important thing is that you get the fueling right on the bike, and I think that will be very critical. That will make the difference when you go onto the run. Don, I mean, when you racing half iron distance, I mean, I don't think you would generally feed too much on the run either. Am I mistaken, or where do you focus your feed?
No eating on the run. Just like you say, on the bike, and then getting off the bike. Like you said, obviously, I'm hoping to run like more 80-something minutes for the run on a good day, and you don't need anything for that. I've had enough on the bike to carry me through. The same thing with the Coke. It does have its place towards the end of the race. I mean, you don't want to start with that too early because it's going to drop you. You want it to drop you when you've crossed the finish line. But sometimes it is the little bit of sugar and a bit of caffeine or whatever's in Coke, just to hype you up towards the finish and just kind of keep your brain in it, because often towards the end of the run, your form starts to falter, your legs are getting tired, and your mind starts wandering. Sorry, I might have disappeared there. So that little bit of sugar and Coke at the end of the run maybe, but you should be able to do enough on the bike to get you through most of that run. And then maybe for the guys who are running a little bit longer, those little chews are the perfect kind of thing. You just stick them in all those tri-shorts have got little pockets and stuff like that. Pop one of those in your mouth every now and again, chew it just before you get to your watering point, and then chase it down with a gulp of water, and that'll do well.
Something I just thought of now, which I've done when I've actually raced a half Ironman, which is half iron distance overseas, in an extremely tough race where the actual finish is a lot longer than a normal half iron distance, just because of the undulating and tough course. What I've sometimes done in races like that, where I know that I'm going to be a lot more tired coming off the bike and I've got a tough run ahead of me, I actually sometimes leave a bottle of nutrition inside the transition zone, so that when I come into T2, I can actually grab that bottle and I'll take in a little bit of nutrition with me while I'm running, even if I drink a third of it or whatever, just to get some calories into the system. I actually take in a little bit of protein as well, and then I just toss the bottle, I throw it, and then I know that I've actually taken in enough nutrition at the onset of the run to possibly see me through the run without any requirements a little bit later. So maybe an idea would be to leave some bottles, at least 1 or 2 bottles in. Maybe you want to leave a little bit of water in there, and maybe another bottle with a little bit of carbohydrate drink or recovery drink or whatever it is, just to sip on before you actually exit into transition. And that's possibly a solution for you as well, which will mitigate you from carrying too much nutrition with you when you get onto the runs. I mean, you can always run with a bottle and you can throw it. It's not a problem at all. There are litter bins en route, so I don't think that will be an issue. But leaving nutrition in T2 is sometimes a good idea. And another thing is that there are sometimes people that lose bottles and lose nutrition if they hit a bump on the bike and suddenly a bottle goes flying out. That can be a little bit of a disaster sometimes. It's happened to me where I've actually once I never recovered the bottle. Once I turned around to pick up my bottle because I knew that if I didn't, I would be in a lot of trouble. But in one race, I actually lost a bottle, and what I did was I actually reduced my fluid intake, and I sort of actually spread out my calorie intake over a longer period of time in order to try and compensate, so that I didn't. I tried to keep the stability there, that I didn't actually have too much of a long area where I ran out of nutrition. And again, it was good that I had bottles of nutrition sitting inside the transition zone, because when I came into T2, I could top up a little bit and then I could go out. So maybe that's an idea. I don't know, Donovan, if that's ever happened to you and how you've dealt with it, but maybe you can let us know.
No, I don't drop a bottle there. I see a lot of 400 or 500 rand bottle cages, these fancy carbon bottle cages, and the guys forever throwing the bottles. I go for the cheap tighter bottle cages that you can just squeeze them and they hold the bottle in. Because as you say, it's a disaster if you lose that bottle. You'd rather have a couple more grams in bottle cage and one that holds your bottle properly.
No, I agree with you 100%. Actual fact, I've got an X-Lab bottle cage at the back. Those Ironman cages, and they're very bad at holding bottles. I actually take elastic bands and I take insulation plumbing tape, and I actually tie those bottles in there because there's no ways that I'll take a chance in losing one. So I think just be prepared for that. It's quite important. I'm going to
the bottle cages. Sorry, the bottle cages that sit behind the seat are the worst, because there's much more what you might call it.
There's more vibration.
There's much more leverage. Yeah, it throws the bottle. So yeah, definitely invest in a bottle cage that'll squeeze that bottle tight.
I just want to because Donovan's on here, and actually Donovan is one of the sales directors for Innovate running shoes. I just he asked me if I could put a question forward to you guys, and it's just for interest sakes. I've got a couple of running brands of shoes that I've actually posted as part of a poll. I know it's not nutrition related, but I'd actually like to know which running brand of shoes you use. I might not have listed them, but if not, you can just use the other. I'm limited to how many that I can actually stick in there, but it would be quite interesting to see who uses which brand of shoes. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. Okay, that's quite interesting. If there are any other questions, please feel free to ask. So someone posted 3 brands of shoes. Thanks, Leo.
Oh, okay. Well,
But
it's going to be a long run.
I think there's once, I think it's suppose it's just one specific one for the event, but it will be interesting to see. Okay, so I just want to thank everybody for attending this webinar. I wanted to actually launch another poll, in actual fact, because I think one of the things that we like to know as a company is, and we have done a couple of webinars, is do you actually find them useful? I mean, would you like to see us doing more webinars going forward? Because we actually we've got the technology to be able to do it, and we would like to do at least one every month or two. And I think from our perspective is that it doesn't have to just be on nutrition. We can bring in experts in all different fields and discuss whether it's products, etc., whatever it is. We're able to do these webinars on quite a regular basis. I think so. There's quite a bit of information we've given you. By the way, this whole session's been recorded, and I do promise you that tomorrow we will upload it to YouTube. So if you want to go through the slides and you want to review it, you're welcome to. I think it's quite quite useful. And if you've got any questions, you're welcome to drop us an email. In actual fact, I haven't put Donovan's email address up there, but if anybody wants to get hold of him, you're welcome to contact us, and we can put you in contact. Somebody asks you, Don, are cheeseburgers good for carb loading?
Wow, they see me somewhere eating one.
I don't know.
No, they're terrible things.
Yeah, you know what? You've got to understand that if I was going to spend thousands of rands on an event, on airfare, on accommodation, and all these months of training to gear up for a single event, you might be fit and you might be fast and you might be in the best condition of your life. But if you make one mistake with nutrition or do something different that week before, all of that is gone to waste because you're going to have a miserable day. So it's not long to go. Just try and keep your focus on your nutrition this week. Try and eat cleanly. Make sure you hydrate properly, and don't overdo it. Just make sure you arrive there in good condition. And I think it's very important that you try and get some rest this week. A lot of people also get ill before events because obviously the stress that they're putting on their bodies during training can sometimes lead to fatigue or lowered immunity. I think that's quite important. Hello? Okay, so I just saw the audio drop for a second. Yes. So I was just saying that when people tend to train hard, what actually sometimes happens is that their immunity is lowered. Sometimes they'll end up getting sick before an event. If that's the case, I mean, you can give yourself a bit of a vitamin C dose the week before. If you are feeling a little bit ill, one of the things that I do leading up to an event is I actually give myself a Neurobion, which is a vitamin B1, 6, and 12, a sort of a complex injection. I find it just really helps boost the immunity a little bit. It doesn't do any harm to you, and it won't impact you negatively on the day for sure. What you don't use, you'll get rid of, your body will get rid of anyway. But just and try and avoid people that are ill this week, because the last thing you want to do is come into contact with somebody that's actually ill. So if your work colleagues are sick and coughing and sneezing, just call in sick and stay at home and work at home, because you don't want to land up ruining your day. So I think from our side, I'd like to thank Donovan very, very much for taking his time to join us. Very, very much appreciated, Don. I know you're a busy guy. And I'd also like to just wish you all the best of luck for Sunday. Let us know how it went. And one of the things that I love to do is post-race analysis. So if you have a bad day or if you have a good day, it will be interesting to hear, how you did, how you feel yourself, how you finished. You can drop me an email. I'd love to hear. I get emails from different people all the time telling me I hate this product or I hate that product or I ruined my nutrition because I did this, and this. But sometimes it's actually something so simple that actually could have caused the issue, and it will be very interesting to hear. So we're looking forward to hearing some feedback, and we wish you all the best. I'm going to close off the webinar now. So one of the guys who is attending actually is a doctor. So he says, I've been wearing a mask at work because he's had to be working in the TB ward for the last month. So he's been wearing a mask to work every day. Well, I think that's a brilliant idea. I would do the same. Actually, in fact, I probably wouldn't even go to work if I knew I had to work in a TB ward the week before half iron distance. But thanks very much, everyone, for attending. And we're going to be holding some webinars at least once a month, but sometimes a little bit even more frequent. And we'll keep you posted. Don, thanks very much for joining us. It was great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, and all the best to everyone.
Okay. Cheers, guys. Cheers. Have a good one.